And I said, what comes after the peak of the hype cycle? This rapid
Valley of
decline.
disillusionment.
I mean, there's this big uptick, then there's this rapid decline in what they call the trough of disillusionment, right?
Yeah.
And so I just this morning I saw, the latest AI hype cycle chart for this year, and sure enough, generative AI is now sliding down the backside of that slope.
Hi, and welcome to Leading with Data, a podcast where we talk to the leaders in AI and ML and bring their perspectives to all of you. How they are thinking, what are they focusing on, how are they seeing the world today. And today, I have with me Dr. Kirk Borne. Dr. Kirk Borne is a prominent data scientist with more than 40 years of experience. He is the founder of Data Leadership Group LLC and an AI thought leader, a career data professional, a research astrophysicist who has contributed to NASA's space science programs. Dr. Kirk Borne holds more than 20 awards and honors from across the globe and has 6 publications to his name. He's one of the kindest leaders I know of, and he has been extremely supportive of our initiatives at Athletics Vidhya. He was the first keynote speaker at the very first Data Hack Summit in 2017, and more recently, he has agreed to be an advisor on our Generative AI Pinnacle program. Dr. Kirk, welcome to the show.
You're welcome, Kunal. It's great to be here. It's been 7 years, and the world has changed
Yeah.
in so many ways. I mean, I don't think anyone knew what generative AI was 7 years ago.
Correct.
So things have changed, and but sometimes the more they change, the more they stay the same. Because I
Yeah.
like the title of your podcast, "Leading with Data." I mean, it's all about the data that fuels these things we're doing.
Great. So, Dr. Kirk, last time, when we met, and this was Data Summit, so we were in 2017, deep learning, and your talk at that time was on TensorFlow. Today, obviously, the world looks very different. Uh, how has been this journey for you, and in your own startup, Data Leadership Group? So can you talk about how have been these, let's say, last 7 years for you, and then how has been this journey for you?
Well, I think one of the things I've observed, because at that time I was working for a large management consulting company, and a lot of the clients, this was 7 years ago, right? A lot of the clients were
Yeah,
just getting ready to do big time data analytics. All right, I mean
yeah,
some have been doing it for a while, some had little smaller parts of their organizations doing it, but they really were going really intensely into it. So they really needed sort of those sort of helps along the way. How do we get our whole organization data literate? How do we democratize data? So those kind of things were discussed then. I don't think AI was in any of that conversation. I
yeah,
mean, it was probably mentioned, of course, because that's the natural progression of all this stuff. But it really wasn't like what people were asking for. So now it's sort of flipped. I mean, all the conversation is around AI, and generative AI,
correct.
of course, is the hottest thing in the world. Um, so I gave a talk not too many months ago, actually, for an AI boot camp in India. Okay, so I was not
Oh,
in
interesting.
India. I was
Okay.
at I was at home in the United States, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning my time.
Oh, wow.
I gave
Yeah,
this talk,
respect.
and one of the things I put in this chart was the sort of the hype cycle. Okay, so you may
Yeah,
be familiar with the hype cycle of different technologies where they reach a peak, and there's all these expectations that are very high, and before that peak, there's a trigger, right? So the trigger last year was probably sort of these GPT
wow.
models that came
Chat
out.
GPT.
It
Yeah,
just the thing just ignited this enormous interest. So I in my talk I was talking about this, and I had the hype cycle chart in my talk, and I said, what comes after the peak of the hype cycle? this rapid
Valley of
decline.
disillusionment.
I mean, there's this big uptick, then there's this rapid decline in what they call the trough of disillusionment, right?
Yeah,
And so I just this morning I saw, the latest AI hype cycle chart for this year, and sure enough, generative AI is now sliding down the backside of that slope. So I think what happens is people get
interesting.
excited about something, and then it's sort of like everything in life, right? I go to the restaurant and then they have my favorite pie or cake or something, and if I eat
Yeah,
too much of that, I suddenly don't like it anymore because I ate too much. Okay, so so
interesting. Mhm.
so I think what we lived through these different hype cycles, and they were different as the years went by. Big data, machine learning, AI, quantum computing, blockchain, you name it. It's so I think we're going to see some of that. Companies who are asking and demanding for AI, realizing they didn't have all the data infrastructure in place. So it all comes back to the data for me. And so,
Interesting.
so what's old is new again. What's new is old again, or something like that. I don't know. So it's like uh, you have to have all your data sort of not just clean, quality, accessible, usable, blah 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 data, but you also need the infrastructure that can deliver it to these algorithms, right? I mean, it's one thing to build a nice model on your laptop as a data scientist, but that laptop is not an enterprise system that you can deploy across a large organization. It's just right. So there's a lot more engineering and infrastructure and sort of the data questions that have to be addressed. And so people are going to come back, realize even though we might sort of lose some excitement about generative AI, maybe there'll be some disappointment because it didn't immediately solve all our problems, even though it's solving a lot of problems. I'm not saying it isn't; it is solving a lot of problems.
Yeah,
But there's going to be a need to look at the bigger picture, like what is our infrastructure to take care of this. And that infrastructure, I hate to use the word people as part of infrastructure, but it is part of what makes a business work, right? Obviously, the people. And so that comes to training. And I know you're very passionate about that. So I'm excited to be here today talking about this because I know you're passionate about training. I've always
yeah.
been. I mean, it's really about getting the next generation of trainers uh, ready to train the next generation of people, right? I mean, so in some
Yeah,
sense, teaching the teachers or training I'd had some of that experience in university. I felt like I was teaching my students, but at the same time, I had meetings with faculty and I was teaching the trainers, teaching the teachers how to include some of this stuff in their coursework. So it's an exciting time. That's all I get.
Mhm. A couple of a follow-up question on the hype cycle which you mentioned, right? Obviously there are these cycles, but do you feel that these cycles would shorten as we kind of go through? So would we see acceleration in each cycle, or do you feel that's happening, or
Yeah,
it would still be a 7-8 year kind of time frame?
uh, I think it is accelerated in this case. Absolutely. What did they say? That they said, I don't remember the exact numbers in my next sentence here, but so you get the general idea. It took like, I don't know, like 40 years for the first million users of the regular telephone, and it took like
Right.
20, it took like 10 years or 5 years for the first million users of Google, and it took 2 years for the first users of the smartphone, but it took like 2 days for the first million users of ChatGPT,
ChatGPT.
or 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was, some ridiculous compressed. And
Numbers.
so
Yeah.
and so yeah, there is this acceleration in that, and so I think the thing about the hype cycle, it's isomorphic in the sense that you can stretch it or compress it,
Shrink.
but but the features of the curve are
The
still there,
shape.
right? I mean, they may go
Yeah.
fast, they may go faster, they may go slow, but they're still there. And what's interesting about it is that that wasn't invented recently, the hype cycle. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
sociological, psychological thing that's been known for many decades. I mean, and
Decades. Yeah.
I mean, I remember learning some stuff when I first became a manager in a project at NASA 30 years ago, just getting some management training, and they talked about sort of these group dynamics, you get your group excited about doing some new thing, and then and it's the same sort of thing that you don't see the immediate positive result, they don't see the immediate return on the investment. maybe there's some differences of opinion of how we're going to deploy this and do this. And I mean, so now you have friction in your group. And so now you get sort of this depression of excitement, this lack of it. In fact, depression of people. Right?
Wow.
And so it's a sociological thing. And it's probably just the way we're wired, right? We get excited about the new thing because we're trained as children to get excited about the new thing, right? And
Yeah.
so and
That
we
is true.
expect all these wonderful things for our gifts for holidays and birthdays, and then maybe we don't get it, and so we're upset. Okay, so that's
Sure.
an immature response, which a child is naturally going to do. That's fine, but as an adult, we sort of carry over those ways of thinking about things, and that is very super excited when we first see it, and then if it doesn't work immediately, we get less excited about it. So I think your question and your statement is absolutely correct. I mean, we're going to see probably a more compressed race through the hype cycle. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, I think I mean, here's another example: edge computing, edge AI, edge computing. I mean, so
Mhm.
intelligent edge. I connect that to the Internet of Things, even though it doesn't have to be. But pretty much any place where you're collecting data and taking an action where the data is being collected is an edge application. So it can be your phone, it can be your self-driving automobile. It's an edge application, right? You're not sending data back to a cloud to analyze next week or next month or next year, like I used to do when I did my astronomy projects, right? I would collect the data at a telescope. I would go home and get back to my life and maybe look at the data over the next few
Mhm.
weeks or months and write a paper about it a year later. No, you can't do that when you got to take the action right now, right? Obviously, in a self-driving
Yeah.
vehicle, it's got to happen right now. In a medical situation, and it's in an e-commerce store situation, customer interaction, it's got to happen now. And so if you look at the hype cycle for edge, and I say edge generically, again, it's IoT, Internet of Things,
Right.
it's industrial Internet of Things, it's edge intelligence, it's intelligent edge, all edge computing, all those permutations are edge. So edge AI or just edge has been near the peak of the hype cycle for several years. Right? I
Right.
mean, it hasn't really moved very far, and that's
Yeah.
because it's a long time development, right? People are deploying the sensors, people are creating new types of sensors, new ways of collecting data, new processors for doing that processing at the moment of data collection. Whether it's a computer vision application or a voice application or just a time series stream analysis application. So, and of course, the business applications, industry applications, manufacturing, cybersecurity, health, you name it,
Yeah.
they're all just getting on board doing it, right? So I think if it's ever going to go down into a depression, I would be surprised because it's got into it. To me, that's sort of where the whole future is. It's actually it's our applications truly being intelligent again has to make the decision at the point of your sensor detects something, right? And so just like as we move through our world, we see, we hear, we sense things, and we don't wait a week to make a decision if something
Yeah.
bad is about to happen. Like I always say the example of if a child runs in front of your car, the camera sees it. You can't send the data back to the data center and the cloud
True.
and, and wait for 15 minutes for the algorithm to say, "Oh, there's a child in front of your car. You should stop." Well, it's too late. 15 minutes later.
True.
And
Right.
so a lot of business and health and cyber security applications have to be just that responsive. And so I think we're just going to see more and more. And I remember someone asked me years ago, what are the most, I mean, years ago, even before AI, people said, what are the most significant applications of, for example, the word back then was big data. What's the most significant application of big data? Then it was data science. What's the most big applications of data science? Then it was machine learning. What's the big, okay. All through the years, I said,
Yeah.
well, my answers remain constant. The biggest applications are the applications that touch every human being on earth, and that's cybersecurity and health.
True.
At
True.
some point,
True.
so even if you're off the grid and you live in an area where there's not a lot of internet or maybe zero internet, still people's identities are wrapped up in whatever life they have, unless they're really truly off the grid. I mean, those people depend on some kind of banking, some kind of health services, some kind of food supply services. something. And if those things are become affected, by cyber attacks, and
Yeah.
don't fool ourselves. I mean, generative AI is being used very aggressively, by the bad guys, right? So we're all going to be in a place where we're going to need these applications to respond, take some kind of decision, or at least a recommended decision, recommend an action at the point of data collection, and that's what an edge application is. And I think it's okay that it stays at the peak of the hype cycle for year after year after year because I really do think that's where the action is. I mean, literally, the action is
Right.
at the edge, not.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Uh, and you've also founded data leadership group during this period, right? So can you tell a bit more about what it is, what it does, what are some of the focus areas
Sure.
of the company?
Yeah. Well, the first question I get is people ask me about the group, and I said it's just me, one person, but it's a group of services. Okay, so it's a little play on
Yeah.
words. It's a group of things which includes some of the things I've been saying here: the training, education, mentoring, and then there's sort of the business side of strategic advising, keynote speaking. I'm very active in social media, which is how we found each other initially years ago, of course. And so a lot of companies contact me as a leading influencer to promote their products and services. Okay, so for me, it's how I make my living now. I don't have an employer. I am my own employer. so I,
Great.
I have
Mhm.
so if I get mad at my employee, that's me. I have to look in the mirror and have a talk with myself. But it's like, again, so it's all about training, mentoring, advising, building up the competencies and the skills of people, but at the same time promoting those companies who are doing those things. And so I do things like this podcast.
Mhm.
I do webinars, content creation, and the other roles I have include advisory roles for organizations.
Yeah.
I think you sort of roped me into you two
Yeah.
brought
I
me
mean,
into something
the
with you
Gen
guys.
Pinnacle program. Yeah. So
Yeah, so
the
I'm looking
program
for it.
focusing
I'm
on
looking
generative AI.
Yeah,
Correct.
so I'm looking into that, and so what I love about doing the advisory role is I get to see sort of from the inside what you guys are thinking. What innovative organizations like your own, what you're thinking and doing, and have a little bit of input to it. And so sometimes I just sit quietly because I'm so impressed that I can't think of anything positive. I'm not positive. I can't think of anything that I can say that's going to make you be more
So,
positive than you already are. But at the same time, I mean, there's not to spend too much effort on this part of the conversation, but I have spent 40 years working with data systems,
yeah.
as a scientist, as an educator, as an advisor, yeah, in a lot of different roles. And so hopefully there's some one or more of those will bring
Yeah.
value to the conversation.
Sure. So for let's say a large organization who is hearing generative AI and AI related news all around, but still not sure about how to kind of go about doing it. And so in your experience, what are some of the common challenges or mistakes or myths? And then, how would you recommend a company like this to kind of think about investing in AI or Gen AI?
Well, for one thing, there's a lot of common problems for any of these kinds. Any just fill in the blank, whatever the technology is, right? One of the common problems is the FOMO problem, fear of missing out, right? So some
Yeah.
organizations will decide to do it out of fear of missing out, right? That their competitors are doing it, everyone else is doing it, so I need to do it, right? It's sort of like that old quote years and years ago that some guy said about big data, right? He said big data is like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, but no one actually knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
But so doing it for the wrong reason is a problem. Another thing is not having the data infrastructure in place to actually manage it and make it happen, which we just talked about. Another problem is also how do you get everybody on board, because there's a lot of fear within employees in companies that, hey, this is going to take over my job. I'm going to lose my job. Um, and a couple other things that I just want to hint at is trying to do too much. Right? We're gonna, I sort of get disturbed when people say like, "Hey, first time I ever heard a statement, I didn't even know why, but I had a negative reaction. A very, very large corporation, with one of the largest in the world, was giving a talk at a conference, and the speakers said, "We are a data first company," and I just thought this just didn't sit right with me until I sort of thought about it, and I said, "No, data is just the fuel, right? It's just the input.
Right.
I mean, your business already has a reason to exist, right? So you
Yeah.
already have what would you call your mission statement or your North Star or whatever you want to call it, right? So it's not about your mission is not to collect data, right? Your mission is to
Yeah.
serve your customers, serve your clients, serve society, or whatever your mission is. That's your first goal. So now you're going to use this new tool, AI, generative AI, now as to help you do what you already want to do, what you went into business for, right? And so I've actually been an advisor to a couple of AI startups that didn't succeed at all because they said they're going to be an AI company, right? And so with five or three or four people, they decided they're going to do healthcare, cybersecurity, government, finance, logistics, supply chain training. I mean, they started listing like the 25
Yeah.
different industries and sectors they're going to do work in, and they had like three or four people. I said it just it was guaranteed not to work.
Yeah.
And the final sort of little red flag for me is, and this is probably reflects my science background, is for companies to realize this concept of culture of experimentation, right? That you need to test things and experiment with things and see if they actually work. Okay, so what that translates to in simple language is fail fast to learn fast. Okay, so I'm not saying I actually had this conversation with one of my government clients years ago, and as soon as I said fail fast to learn fast, he just cut me off. He said, no, we're not here to fail. Forget it. We're not here to fail. We're not going to fail. We're not going to do that. No, no, no. He was just really disturbed by what I said, and I get it. I understand. I said I'm not talking about strategic failure. I'm talking about more tactical stuff, right? So it's almost like a wartime thing, right? Sometimes in war you have to lose this battle or lose
To
this
win the war.
particular location, this
Yeah.
hill, lose the hill, as they say, to win the battle, or you have to lose the battle to win the war, right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes you have to recognize that sacrificing this is better for the long term. And science is like that. You got to do experiments that sometimes will fail in order to figure out how to do the right thing. And I think generative AI is a perfect example of this because there's so many things that people have said negative about generative AI. Like certainly the GPTs, right? All the hallucinations, right? They come up with very good sounding sentences and paragraphs, which are just not true, right? They're
Yeah.
just not correct. They're just not correct. And
True.
so and so to sort of get started, uh, in some sense, sort of set up a sandbox where your employees who are going to be doing this. So it might be a customer service group that are wanting to generate sort of responses to consumer messages, consumer complaints, consumer questions. So set up like a sandbox where your employees who are in that space can can do those sort of generative AI type of queries and prompts to see what works and what doesn't work. Okay, so some things aren't going to work, but learn in a safe environment where if it fails, it's not a catastrophic thing. So don't expect everything you do is just going to work perfectly. And if it doesn't work perfectly, then shut it all down. That's not the point. I mean, people talked about the invention of the light bulb. Thomas Edison, I guess. He
Yeah.
said he failed 1,000 times to invent the light bulb, but he said, no, no, no. I learned 1,000 ways not to invent
Not
the
to
light
have
bulb.
a. Yeah.
So he learned he had 1,000 learning experiences, not 1,000 failures, is how he described it. And so I think recognizing the importance of those learning experiences for the employees who were going to use this stuff is invaluable, right? Because in some sense, the best training no offense. Yes, it's good to take training courses and boot camps, but sometimes the best training is to put your hands on the software and see what
on the
happens.
software. That's true. True.
that's
That is
oh,
so true.
that's that's how I learned SQL years ago. I mean, I was trained as a PhD astrophysicist. I didn't know what SQL was back in the day.
Yeah.
Of course, nowadays all astronomers use databases. But we always use data. We just didn't have them in databases when I went to school. That was all 100,000 years ago. But once I got to NASA, a lot of the data systems were accessible through databases. All right, so the data was described in metadata form, and so I had to learn SQL. Well, how did I learn SQL? Did I go take a course in it? No, I just learned by trial and error. I did queries, and so, one day I did a 16-way join. If you know what that is, you probably think,
Yeah,
what kind of crazy
definitely.
person am I? No, that was sort of like the worst thing you can do, because it's sort of like a 16 factorial compute time, and
Yeah.
so it basically completely brought the whole NASA system down. And and the database administrator called my office and said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know what I was doing. I
Uh,
didn't know what I was doing, but I learned, okay, that's not a good thing to do. I'll never do
Good
that
thing.
again. so I think it's at that place here now where you can't send everybody to training, but you got to have some people in training. But you also can realize that the hands-on, real life experience with the stuff is going to be the best teacher, so to speak. So, but again, the having the foundational course is absolutely essential, because people don't even know the language. And I saw an article recently. It's it was for business leaders, and the article said how to speak AI, and then
Yeah.
it's sort of like I used to teach my students. I said, I'm going to teach you even how to spell SQL.
Okay. Yeah.
SQL.
Um,
So they got to laugh. But the point is that can you actually describe it and use it intelligently in a sentence, like instead of the buzzword bingo, right? So does your
yeah.
sometimes businesses just use put all the buzzwords in a sentence. We're using AI and generative AI to produce, you know, efficient processes and improve business outcomes for customer success. So what did you just say? I mean, you didn't say anything, because every business leader in the entire
Yeah.
world could use the same sentence. There's nothing in that sentence that tells me what you are doing that's special. So being able to use it in a way that's blends naturally into what you're doing. Okay, so I think that's valuable for not just business leaders, but everyone who's doing it needs to be able to explain, in that kind of language. And so literacy, AI literacy, data literacy, these are all good foundational skills.
Data Hack Summit this year is going to be bigger and better. With more than 100 speakers from across the globe, this 4-day event will bring the future in front of your eyes. We are doing highest ever number of workshops, but they are getting sold out. If you can be in Bangalore from 7th to 10th of August, you don't want to miss this chance to get a peek into how generative AI is defining the new world order. And now, back to the podcast. Great. So, from the organization's point of view, one is obviously, as you mentioned, AI literacy and making sure that there is this general awareness about AI, what it can do, what it cannot do, almost enabling people to ask the right questions. And along with that, what should be some of the other initiatives, or how should they kind of plan this journey?
Yeah. So one thing to think about AI is generative AI is just a small subset of all of AI. In fact, if you follow me on Twitter at all, I posted a graphic today where there's AI, there's machine learning, there's neural
Yeah,
networks, there's deep learning, and there's generative
then
AI.
there
So
is
so
generative.
AI is a big universe of things, and generative
Yeah,
AI is down in some
very
little
small.
corner of that universe, right? And that generative AI is just a part of deep learning, which includes not just the language models, but mostly people think
Vision.
about. But generative AI also is computer vision. I mean, if you're familiar with
Yeah,
things like Stable Diffusion and DALI,
correct.
people generate images and even video sequences. So I actually wrote a short. I should say I had ChatGPT write me a short story, and I asked Stable Diffusion to create some graphical images for my
Major.
short story.
Yeah.
And so I posted this on Medium and I explained what I did. I mean, I'm not taking credit for the story. I said I asked ChatGPT to give me this story, and this is what happened. And I asked Stable Diffusion to give me some images to go with this story, and these are the images. So I explained how I did it, so anyone else can do the same thing. But the point is that uh, sometimes people think it's only the chat part, but not the vision part. But there's also other types of data besides text and video, even though that's most of the data in the world. But so we come back to time series and a lot of other things. Cyber network logs, they don't naturally fit into images or PDF
Correct.
documents. but so anyway, so when you think of AI as a bigger thing, one of the things under that umbrella is automation. So sometimes some of the simplest but highest return on investment discoveries that I've talked about, insights discovered from data with companies, come from very, very small, sort of what appears to be very, very small insight, which turn into incredible value for the business, right? Because it's just something, it's sort of like the old recommender engine, people who bought this book also like this book. People who like this movie also like that movie. Well, before the age of the internet, it was just word of mouth. But then someone discovered, hey, we could put this online because we can use the data of who's been shopping for these things. And so it's sort of a relatively small thing. Okay, so if you go back to the old data mining and machine learning books that I learned
Yeah.
from 25 years ago, they talk about association mining, association rule mining, market basket
Correct.
analysis, and that's all it is, right? It's just a statistical counting game, right? What things end up together more frequently than other things? All right, so that's not AI. What I just described, market basket analysis, it's just a statistical counting.
Correct.
But if you can automate that and build it into a system, right? So every time I see this behavior along with this behavior on my network, then that's probably a something to investigate. I'm not saying necessarily it's a cyber incident, but it should be investigated. It's abnormal behavior. What's normal behavior,
Yeah.
right? So what's abnormal behavior? So sometimes the questions and the techniques are relatively simple, but now you want to automate that because you want to do it at scale, at very large scale, and that's where the automation that AI can give you is. And so, what can generative AI do for you? It can actually you ask it to create the code to do just the
To
thing I
do
just
that.
described. So I don't need to know how to write the code, how to
Yeah.
deploy, and then not just write the mathematical steps, which I could do, but how do I now integrate that into a system that's deployed on a network that accesses the cloud that reports to XYZ organizations when it finds something. That's too much for my brain to handle. But I can ask the AI to generate that whole system for me, have it validated and verified again in a sandbox environment where we test it. So if something goes wrong, it has no catastrophic harm to it. It's and so automating even simple processes is still AI, right?
Yeah.
But as long as it's not, there's one distinction I want to make, and that's not the same as a robot who just consistently does the same thing. All right, pack the
Yeah.
box, pack the box, pack the box, pack the box, seal the box, pack the. I mean, robots could do this. It's not intelligent.
Yeah.
All right, it's an intelligent robot if it realizes the box is now full, but there's a smaller little item. So like
That can go in.
it's like these big online stores where they have their warehouse. The robots go around picking the items, right? It's not people. The robots go and find the items, and sometimes they want to ship all that in one box or as few boxes as possible. I still think sometimes it can be smarter than the way it is. Sometimes when I get
Right.
like I order 5 things and I get 4 boxes, it's like they could they have combined some of this.
Yeah.
An intelligent robot would see that there's a smaller item on the shopping list for this customer that will fit into this last little space in this box instead of me starting a whole new box for one little thing. So that's just an example where something which can start off as just a repetitive process, which is not necessarily intelligent, to putting some intelligence in it. and that intelligence comes from a lot of times from a human input. They said, "Oh, this would be a smarter way to do it. So can we figure out an algorithm to enable this automated system to do it this more intelligent way?" And so keeping that human in the loop, I think, is another sort of major sort of things we want to keep in front of businesses. Even though a lot of businesses have probably let people go, maybe some of those people they're letting go are ones who've been afraid to even try generative AI. Maybe the business says, "Hey, I want you to try this out, try this tool," and there's some resistance. Well, I understand people have resistance, but on the other hand, uh, one of my big messages to people is being a lifelong learner, right? I mean, you got to be ready to learn new things because the world is changing that rapidly. It goes right back to this compressed hype cycle. I mean, back when I went to school, again a long time ago, you could learn a skill, and it doesn't matter what the skill is. It could be a very professional job or a tradesperson's job, but that skill would last you for an entire career. Now, careers are changing on shorter timescales than 40 or 50 years. They're changing on even less than 10 years, and even in some cases less than 5 years. The things which we consider a career path, like prompt engineering right now, is prompt engineering is all over the place. I can't tell you how many thousands of people I see they are offering prompt engineering, and that's fine because it's important right now. But I think probably 10 years from now, you won't be seeing that. Maybe even five
Yeah,
years from now, you won't.
not
But
even 10, yeah,
it's
5 or probably
so
lower.
so I think in training courses, that's why literacy is more important than the specific skill. It's like coding literacy, right?
Right.
It's just, I remember there was this article written years ago. A person by the name of Jeanette Wing, she wrote this amazing article that was just being quoted by everybody. It was called Computational Thinking.
Yeah,
So she was in charge of some of the U.S. Federal research grants in computer science. All
yeah,
right, and so she's. I guess I don't know what she was thinking at the time, but I'm imagining she was thinking that we not just want to fund more people just churning out new algorithms and new, just new software. We want people to be thinking computationally, thinking about how do we
right.
parallelize a process, or how do we put conditionals into a process so that it knows when to exit this flow and go into this other workflow. Like that's like when you have the anomaly detection in your network or in your healthcare system. I mean, you have to have some kind. So that way of thinking carries you your whole life. I mean,
Yeah,
the programming languages change. I mean, I learned Fortran. I did Fortran for 20
right.
something years. Right? No one talks about Fortran anymore, and that's just fine. They don't need to talk about Fortran anymore. That's fine. Uh, but the things have. I remember even when I was learning Fortran, everyone said Pascal. Pascal is the language of the future. Everyone's going to learn Pascal. And then at that early part of our career, my wife got a government job before we had our children, and they were learning Ada. Ada is the language of the future. Ada, named after Ada
Yeah,
Lovelace, the lady
right.
who helped Charles Babbage invent the
The
first computing
mathematician.
languages
Yeah,
200 years ago, or whatever, 150, 80, I don't know, a long time ago. Anyway, so the point is that you can think that this thing you're learning, the specifics of this thing, like the Pascal language or the Ada language, is going to be here forever, and it isn't. But the ways of thinking and ways of solving problems aren't going to change. So that's
yeah.
anyway. So you got me really started on this one.
No.
Sorry.
No problem. In fact, the related question which I wanted to ask was, in the machine learning, deep learning waves, so to speak, we saw companies almost investing a lot in hiring data scientists and then realizing, oh, you need data engineers to kind of build the infrastructure for these data scientists to be truly effective. uh, do you see that kind of cycle happening again with Gen AI? So right now there is a lot of excitement about what LLMs could do, or maybe what stable diffusion models could do. But then designing those pipelines or the architecture is still kind of the big issue. But not many companies kind of realize that
Yeah,
upfront. So
yeah,
do you see this then?
yeah. That's definitely true. Yes, I mean, it goes back to this idea that building a model on your laptop as a data scientist is not the same as deploying it in an operational environment
Correct.
where it has to have all the security features and privacy features and all the controls and all that stuff, right? And
Yeah.
that's fine. I see. So my background is not engineering, science, but I was a manager on projects at NASA where people were building data systems for satellites. Now there's something that had to be like have everything working because you're talking about a multi-billion dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, a very expensive piece of equipment in space. We better get this right. And so I had working for me as a manager lots of really smart engineers. Thank you.
Right.
Because none of that would have made it. None of it would have worked. I mean, oh yeah, we're collecting all this wonderful data. We make all these discoveries, but none of that would have been possible without all the engineering infrastructure to make it possible. And so, yes, I think people still need the data scientists, right? You still need those people who are going to do that experimentation stuff and a more science. I mean, everybody, like I said earlier, like a lot of people should have this idea that you're testing and learning and test. But in terms of those who are creating new systems or new models or new products around AI and data, the data scientists, for the most part, I guess, are trained as problem solvers, as testers, experimenters. Right, so they sort of have that sort of mentality. And I'm not saying other people don't, because every human being just try to raise a child. They're constantly testing you and testing their world, right? So that's what we naturally do. But anyway, so you're still going to need those people who are in that science frame of thinking. But you're going to definitely need probably more of the people who are in the engineering side of it, where they can actually understand all the things around networks and workflows and data flows and security and privacy and just the very long list of things that the data scientist is probably not thinking about.
I think about, yeah.
I'm
True.
thinking about my hyperparameter tuning and and, my, and what similarity metric am I going to use
Yes, for this.
for this unsupervised learning algorithm that I'm developing? That's it. Okay, so I'm pulling
True.
out my math.
True.
I'm pulling out my math book while other people are pulling out wires out of the wall.
Well,
So oops, a very different way of thinking there. Anyway, so I think we have
yes,
a good sort of model with how data science came into being as a real profession in the last 20 years or so. That
true.
there was sort of there's a lot of rush to hire data scientists and things like that. And it's still there because, again, the data is not going away, it's getting larger. But then people realize we need those engineers, data engineers, machine learning engineers, right? So data engineers, sometimes there's no distinction, but I think more of sort of the data infrastructure, whereas the machine learning engineer is sort of the person who's deploying the model and doing the
Yeah.
ML ops, monitoring the model for drift. Is it still accurate? They talk about data drift and concept drift. I mean, there are different types of things that the machine learning engineer is monitoring to make sure the model is still accurate, up to date, delivering the right thing, is unbiased, and all those questions that come from understanding the machine learning, but from an engineering perspective, whereas the data engineer is understanding the data from an engineer's perspective.
True. And in your experience of different applications you might be seeing nowadays, what has been the most exciting application of GenAI and what has been the most worrying application of GenAI?
Well, I think I've already said, but I think the most worrying one is the cyber
Yeah,
bad actors out there who are.
deep fakes.
Just an example. There's been articles about how banks and financial institutions are using voice ID as your password to log in, right? So we went through the phase where we had real passwords, and then we had Face ID, so I could log into my phone by just staring at the screen. I can log into some of my bank accounts just by staring at the screen. And now people are saying you log into your financial accounts with just your voice. Well, generative AI is getting real good at replicating all of those things.
All
And
of
so,
those.
so people like you and me who may be online having podcasts together, uh,
Yeah,
a generative AI can generate a voice stream just from our voice pattern in this podcast. Um,
correct.
and so literally yesterday I saw an article which was talking about how it's an absolute disaster that banks are using voice as password. Right next to it was another article saying how fantastic it is that banks and financial institutions are using voice as passwords.
Wow.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
that so obviously that one, the fact that there's so much extremely positive and extremely negative opinion about this one specific thing
And
tells me,
both of those could be written by
well,
AI for all
well,
we know.
I did a lot of work in physics and math and in my astrophysics days, and one of the things I learned about is stability, stable equilibrium and unstable equilibrium.
Uh,
Right. So if I had a pencil here, which I don't, I could stand a pencil up on the blunt end where the eraser is, and I can stand it up and it'll stay. If I turn it the other way around on the point, it'll fall over. There's nothing I could do.
yeah.
So it's unstable. Okay, it's gonna fall.
Yeah.
All right, I can stand the pencil up. Okay, it looks stable, but it's not. It's actually an unstable equilibrium because if you just push it a little bit, well, a tiny
It'll
little
fall.
bit.
Yeah.
I mean, microscopic, I won't fall, but I mean, just any kind of reasonable little touch of the thing is going to fall over. All right. Whereas if you have like a marble in a round bowl, you push the marble from the bottom of the bowl and comes right back down. So that's a stable
Yeah.
equilibrium. Right? It won't go away. It'll come back to the starting point eventually, right? So that's a stable equilibrium. So I think with something like this case with the bank situation, we're at an unstable equilibrium. There's huge forces pulling it both negatively and positively. And I think too often the negative forces win in those cases. So that's one
Yeah.
of my biggest worries about Gen AI. People worry about the hallucinations and the fake, facts that it generates, and that's a problem because everyone actually makes decisions based upon those fake things. That's a problem. Certainly in education, where students are now using Gen AI and not using their minds anymore. I mean, that's
Mm.
we've been talking for years about how do we get our students to use their minds more. I don't think Gen AI was the problem. I don't think Gen AI has been the problem. I think that's still been a problem for a
Yeah.
long time. So what's some of the positive things? I think on the customer service side, I've seen maybe that's just sort of the places I've seen it are it's reflecting my opinion here. But I've done a lot of work with sort of companies who do a lot of customer service software using AI and machine learning to improve customer experiences, customer interactions, responses to customers. And so I'd say in that space, having the customer service rep respond quickly to the call. I think I learned this is one thing that I learned at Data Hack 2017, which I've used in my talks ever since. Because one of
Oh
the
wow.
speakers, one of the speakers who followed me, was talking about call centers. Now, of
Hmm.
course, it's sort of a joke in the United States. If you call a big company for help, you're going to end up speaking to someone in India. Okay, so the
In
call
India.
center is
Yeah.
based in India. Okay, so okay, I mean, I'm fine with that. It's just sort of a standard thing. You expect to not you expect the call to come from respond from India. Okay, so anyway, this person was talking about call centers. And I said this ought to be interesting, right? Because this is the world capital of calls, customer calls.
Mhm.
And he says, the, so the most boring aspect of a job of a call center person is answering the same question over and over and over and over again, right? Whereas the most exciting and rewarding aspect is when they solve a difficult problem, a unique, special, difficult problem for the customer. That you know, that's that's where the reward is when you get to do something really that taps into all the knowledge you already have about the business to solve a different kind of problem than just the same problem, right? So everybody who calls up says, "Well, I forgot my account number, or I forgot what the due date of my bill is. Who do I send my payment to?" A bot can answer those questions, right? And so,
Yeah.
so this was the point of that talk at Data Hack. I remember the guy saying, he said, these bots, which are just coming into customer call centers in those days, are actually helping with answering the frequently asked questions, right? So every business should on their website should have FAQs, right? Something like that.
FAQs. Yeah.
And so you feed those FAQs into no matter what kind of company you have. If you have FAQs, you feed those FAQs into a bot, which you from one of the cloud service providers. They allow you to do that. You can build your own chatbot from your data that is your FAQs and their bot.
Intelligence. Yeah.
So yeah, so now any company can sort of like for very low cost and not even have to don't have to hire any data scientists or engineers, just use the cloud service provider, have your call center now handled primarily by the bots for all the frequent questions, and for the difficult ones it goes to a person. And so not only does that make the life easier for the customer call person, which is sort of the light bulb moment, my aha moment when during that talk in Data Hack was like, you're
Yeah.
right. That person who's the call center person is probably going to be like more excited
Very happy.
about helping
Yeah.
someone with a hard problem. That's how I felt back when I was doing astrophysics, right? I was the nerd in the class who loved the hard physics problems.
Correct. No,
I wasn't I wasn't that interested in the simple physics problems. So what I see now though with Gen AI is the ability to, if the response needs to be like a detail thing. For example, the customer's calling, say, "How do I?" Yeah, like I'm having a problem with my heating and furnace in my house now, right? So I got to replace the part. I got the part. How am I going to get in there to replace it? I mean, it's
yeah.
it's not hard. I just it's just I don't know all the
Need
steps.
guidance. Yeah.
So you can imagine there's a manual that probably explains the steps, but maybe there's Gen AI can produce the steps. Okay, so that's just one
Yeah.
example, but I mean, so the Gen AI can help the customer call person generate a response, even though you're still talking to the customer. I say, hey,
Yeah.
here's the 25 steps you need to take, right? And I'll email it to you. Wow,
Correct.
that that's like wow. I mean, you did that
True.
in less than a minute. Plus, the customer who calls on the phone gets sort of immediate contact with a human being because the human person is not answering all the FAQ questions.
Correct.
Sometimes. Okay, so there's an example where I think every business who has any kind of a call center or customer call number, which is probably most medium to large businesses in the world, not every small business has that, but I'm sure many do. You can see immediately sort of a positive uh, step, for their own people as well as for their customers. And so, anyway, that's just one example. I think health. I could go on and on and on. I think healthcare is another. I go back to my other statement: cybersecurity, healthcare, biggest applications of everything. So one quick story. I heard a story years ago where it was before the birth of this AI revolution. But a company, a very large company, was developing sort of this cognitive AI capability as an experiment, and they loaded in all this medical data to see if it could answer medical questions on the level that medical doctors could. Okay, so they were able to deploy this at hospitals because it was helping. Again, the medical doctor, the human, is still final decision, but they're getting
Yeah.
help by getting access to. So maybe they don't know the very latest research. They can get access to that research with a very quick question to the AI, and then they, using their experience and training, can analyze and decide from those results. Whereas otherwise, they'd have to go to the library and probably spend 2 or 3 days reading hundreds of journal articles just to find the one thing that they want to know. Now the generative AI can bring it down. So back in the day, before there was generative AI to do that, this search engine allowed hospitals and doctors to find sort of like help them in a diagnosis of critical situations. Well, there was this case of this person whose daughter had a very serious illness and as a baby and was in the hospital as a baby for a long time, not getting any better. All the experts, they analyzed her symptoms. They couldn't come up with a diagnosis. They had no idea what was wrong with her, and so they've heard about this system, and so they fed her symptoms and other diagnostics into that thing, and it suggested that she had this particular disease, and none of the six top
Could have
experts
thought about that.
had ever even heard of that disease before, and it turns out
Yeah.
that's what it was. There was a treatment. She got better and went home, and I actually know the guy, and he actually had a picture of
Wow.
his daughter when he and his wife brought the little girl home. And what's really moving and touching about the picture is that they had twins,
Oh, wow.
two girls, one of which perfectly healthy, the one that was in the hospital for a very long time. And when they brought her home, you could see the one daughter was, I mean, just in the picture,
Yeah.
had, had had not grown because she was basically lying in a hospital bed on tubes, for almost a year. But Yes, and her sister, of course, had grown up a bit in a year,
Grown up. Uh,
and so that was long before generative AI. Just that ability to quickly access information, and again, as much as necessary, leave the human in the loop to make the final decision, the final analysis of what's being delivered from the generative AI. So I think those applications are life changing for people.
and with so much changing, so many new, let's say, algorithms, architectures coming out, as a AI professional or someone who is interested in building AI applications relatively early in their career, what are some of those pieces of advice, or how should they think about their career, and what would be your advice to them?
Well, again, I'm going to come back to learning the terminology.
Yeah.
I hate to say it that way, but uh, all too often I've seen these boot camps. They immediately just start teaching people Python, which is great. But
Mhm.
I actually had an experience where I was working with some people at one of these big client events, and I don't want to speak ill of people, but they were very good at what they did, but they absolutely had no idea of the statistic. They had no understanding of the statistical concepts that they were coding. I mean, I try to describe things to them around conditional probabilities and likelihoods, and it was relevant to the conversation, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And so I think that's not going to be normal. Right? Most people who go to training, they do learn all these things. But again, think about those things that are going to be the lifelong things that you carry with you, the ways of thinking. You know, you uh, communication skills obviously is one of those things. I always believe in data storytelling. All right, how do you communicate it in a way that is understandable to your audience, that moves them to make a decision if that's the point of your making the presentation. I mean, more often than not, a data scientist is not the decision maker. They're doing it for a particular client or a boss or someone who's looking for a solution. So how do you convince them that yours is the right solution? So it's not just showing them code. I had an example of that where people were doing a time series forecasting model for one of our clients, some young data scientists I worked with, and they they fed the data into their code, and they had this fabulous time series forecasting model. So if you're familiar with Holt-Winter's modeling, it's a time series technique that looks at seasonal terms and which go up and down, and also trends. Okay, so purchases sometimes go up and down during the year for different seasons, but there's also trends that happen in the market. Something can be up or down. Anyway, so you add all these different components to a model, you can build a forecasting model. So they were building this model, inputting the data, importing the data from a file to the training set in order to predict future values for these particular items in the bank in the time series. Okay, I don't want to give too many specifics here because I might give the story away.
Sure. Mhm.
But anyway, so they did this beautiful code. They're giving me this presentation because I was part of the advisory team for this team, and so then they showed me the input data, and all the numbers were constant. The whole
Yeah.
time series was constant,
Mhm.
the same number.
Cons.
And so I said, when they showed me, they said, "Oh, that's you're just showing me what the data structure looks like. That's not the actual data set that you're using, right?" I said, "No, that's the actual data. I mean, no, I mean it has certain structure, it has certain rows and columns with certain headings, and said that this, that, and the other thing." I said, "This is just an example of what type of data that you're inputting to your model." I said, "No, this is the real data." And I said, "Well, look at it. All the numbers are the same every single month. So if I want to predict what that value will be for that row, and there was like several dozen rows of different categories of things they were predicting. I said, if I want to know what the future value of that row is, I just use the previous month because it hasn't
Yeah.
changed. It never changes."
Correct.
And they just stopped and looked, and it was like, "Oh, we never actually saw that."
Yeah.
And so as we
All the
as we
code.
did as we talked about it, I wasn't trying to embarrass them. I says, "Well, why would that be?" And they said, "Well, we already know that all of these things are measuring certain outputs from these different processes in this client's business processes, and they're always operating at max capacity. They don't have the capacity to go beyond that any given month, and so any given month it's going to be the same output because there's always more
They
demand
wanted.
than they have
Yeah.
capacity. So they're always going to hit capacity before they run out of demand.
Wow.
And so they knew the answer to the question
But they
and they
didn't
knew how to
apply.
code it, but they didn't stop to think that if I'm going to forecast a future value, and I'll just use the value from the previous month. I mean, that's it. I didn't need
Yeah.
anything more fancy than that. So again, I wasn't there to embarrass them or anything like that. It's just like thinking about what you're doing and look and always, 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 always look at your data. Always, always. Uh, Data profiling. I call that having your first date with your data. Okay. Think about having your first date. What kind of questions you're going to ask? What kind of unusual things are you going to notice about? What are the surprising things you see there? What are the patterns? I mean, so have that first date with your data, and if they had spent that time, again, they already knew what the explanation was, but they didn't connect the explanation with the reality, which is none of the numbers were ever changing. so,
Yeah.
so I think making those connections between what you know, what you've learned, and what you see in front of you, can help you go very, very far, even if it's totally new technology. So it's Gen AI this year. 2 years from now, it might be something so completely different. We don't even have a word for it yet, and that's
Yeah.
okay. You'll be ready for it because you have a way of thinking about things and you have the skill set, which is the fundamental thing that helps you to have that career. But but what actually keeps you on the career path is are the intangible things, right? I mean, that coding skill is going to get you. So people often ask me about should they get a college degree or not? Should they go to college? They can learn Python and get a fantastic paying job as a data scientist. And I said, you're absolutely right. You don't need to go to college to have a fantastic paying job. But if you really want to have a long-term career with advancement, having that additional training is going to be unmeasurable importance to you. I mean, because you're not just learning a thing, you're learning ways of thinking about things, you're learning ways to
Yeah.
solve problems. So the way I was solving problems in my physics classes 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't think about those physics problems anymore, but I think about how do I frame a problem in order to find a solution? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the controlling variables? So I have a way of thinking about it, even though it's not a physics problem anymore that I'm solving. Okay, and so that those ways of thinking make you invaluable. Okay, so the skill makes you valuable. And it's one of those funny words in English language, like visible and invisible are opposites, but valuable and invaluable are pretty much the same
Yeah.
thing. But invaluable is even more than valuable. I mean, it basically means you can't put a value on it because it surpasses anything that has value. So the Python or whatever coding skill, whatever you have, your generative AI skill, that's valuable, all right now. But what's invaluable for your long-term career are all the other things that you learn, you know, along the way, and that can be formal education. I'm not saying it has to be formal, but I still think it's important. I'm not going to say it isn't, but I know a lot of people who didn't go that path and still are very successful. So I'm not trying to make it exclusive here, right? Please understand me.
Mhm.
But getting a broader education than just a specific coding skill is really important.
Great. Thanks for sharing that.
Anyway, so now you know everything I know. I have nothing left to
Great.
share.
It's invaluable. Uh, Great. Dr. Kirk, usually towards the end of each episode, we do a quick rapid fire questions with our guests. And the idea is to hear what is top of the mind and then whatever comes first to your mind. Right.
uh, like
Any particular book which you would want to recommend or had a huge impact on you?
Oh boy, that is hard. I am surrounded by books in my office. That's almost impossible to answer. Um,
Whatever comes top of the mind.
well, I think I had this one book. I won't bring it in front of you because if it's on a stack and it'll fall on top of me if I try to move it. But it's called People Skills for Analytical Thinkers.
Oh, interesting.
And when I first saw the book, I thought it was like an analytics book, but it's not. It's
Hmm.
about people
So
skills,
people,
but from the perspective of analytics. And what do I mean by that? He says the way the person describes it in the book was really fascinating. He said we have our internal algorithms. In the same way in mathematics, x is a function, y is a function of x, right? So x is the input. There's something that operates on x that produces a y, and that's an algorithm, right? Okay, so machine learning, we have algorithms. Everything's an algorithm. Well, we have internal algorithms, right? So when people say something to us, like maybe an insult or praise or something, we may have a built-in way of reacting to that. And it's not just what we hear; it's what we see, what we read, how we interact with people in social settings or whatever. So the whole book is about our internal algorithms and how we can tune them to be a better version of ourselves.
interesting.
To spend and so I liked it because it was really sort of like a mathematical perspective on how to be a better
Wow.
person. I was really
So,
the guy sent me his book to review it for him, just to leave a review online. And I said, okay, another analytics book on my shelf. And so as I started reading it, I said, where's the machine learning part? And then it flipped through the pages. There was no machine learning part.
no
It's
machine
about people
learning.
skills. But as I read it, I realized it was the language of mathematics and analytics throughout this whole book. So anyway,
Wow.
that was not a short answer you were
Fascinating.
looking for. But
But very
but I
fascinating
guess I
even.
liked it because it shocked me. Um,
Yeah.
but really the most recent book I read that really impacted me. It's sitting on my shelf over there. I can't
Hmm.
reach it over here. The title of the book is "When All Was Lost," and it's a true story of a family in Rwanda during the Civil War
Okay.
in the early 1990s. Their father, I actually know the guy,
Hmm.
but one of the oldest son, I actually knew him at the university. He was in our program there,
Hmm.
and his sister wrote the book. 6 children in the family. Their father was the leader of the military and a right hand advisor to the president of Rwanda, and they were assassinated. And how their whole life was basically destroyed, and how in the 30 years that have elapsed since then, how it's been healing, forgiveness, resilience, becoming a better person, and as a consequence of this horrible thing that happened to their family, how there was just a transformational thing in their life about just forgive these people who did this to you. Anyway, so nothing to do with analytics. It's just
Yeah.
so my friend, like I said, this guy I knew at school. One of our students. He contacted me on LinkedIn last year. He said my sister just finished a book about her father. Would you mind taking a look at it? And I didn't know much of the story really. I mean, I heard some little pieces of the story, but as I read that book, I mean, it was just like something else. I mean, what that family went through, and to still turn out to be forgiving,
Positive. Yeah.
successful, positive. Not again, they're not excusing anybody's behaviors, but you got to move on, and they found a way to move on, and that by and the different siblings, 6 children in the family at the time this book was written, which was last year. The mother was still alive. But the 6 children were living in all these different countries around the world because they had to actually leave Rwanda, so they were ended up being scattered across the world. It's just so when all was lost. That's the title of the book. When all was lost. so
That's fascinating.
that's
Sounds
a
fascinating.
very long answer to your question. You got to be careful with me. You ask me a short question, I'll give you a long
No, but
answer.
it is it is very valuable. I'll probably read the book. Uh, uh, what is your favorite programming language? So if you have to write a code, what is your go-to language?
Well, I did 20 years of Fortran programming, which I haven't done very much of in the last 20 years. Okay. So that's my bad. I learned some Python along the way. Uh, didn't do much with it. When I was at the university teaching, we had in our undergraduate program, we wanted to use one language in all our courses, but we wanted this since we had just sort of general courses for other students in the university, not just data science students, but other we provided data science and computational science courses, and so all these other science programs were using MATLAB.
Okay.
Okay, so they're using
Mhm.
MATLAB in their biology courses and their physics
Yeah.
courses, chemistry courses, and even the social sciences and other courses were using MATLAB. And I said, well, if we want to help these students, and again, going back to my belief is that it's the ways of thinking. It's not the specific language that's important. Understanding,
Right.
understanding conditionals, understanding assignments of variables and data structures and all this kind of. So I found myself doing all kinds of MATLAB. I mean, it was sort of like a sort of simplified version of Fortran, which is what I lived and breathed for 20 years. And so I knew the Fortran was never coming back, but MATLAB was like the approved language across the entire university. And I said, I, I was I was surprised at how much I could do, which what I thought was
Hello, MATLAB.
not a full language as much, and I found out it was a full language. It just was, in different ways than what I was used to. So anyway, so that's not going to be probably a reassuring answer to your students who are learning Python and R, but from an education perspective, that I found that was, especially
True.
for introductory students, that and I could do things with it that were actually kind of fun and interesting. So
Mhm. Sure. Uh, what is your preferred social media platform, and what is
well,
the hack
X
which oh,
X, otherwise known as
X?
Twitter. Well, that's where I got to know you and all the wonderful people
Yeah,
of the world. I always tell people my largest following, of course, is United States. Second is India. So I received a very warm welcome when I came to visit you guys. Uh,
no, it
I,
was.
I do have anyway. So X. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, but not nearly as much as the former the former Twitter, now called X. Uh, but I should say that I'll tell it. Okay, I'm a storyteller. Sorry. When I was
Mhm.
at Data Hack 2017, I gave the morning keynote.
Yeah.
There was all these questions after my talk, and you asked me, please take the questions into the hallway because we have more speakers coming. And after a couple of speakers, and it was the break, so I went in the hallway, and I was just surrounded by.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but my Twitter fans. And I stood out there in the hallway for about 6 or 7 hours, surrounded by people, just completely surrounded with answering questions, talking with people. It was just unbelievable experience. Literally until after 6 o'clock in the evening, I was still standing there talking with people. And so it's a little bit after six, the young man who you assigned to be my guide during the week came up to me and said, Kirk, you got an important meeting in the ready room. And so I excused myself from the crowds of people, and he took me back to the ready room. And I said, "Well, what kind of meeting?" He said, "Oh, there isn't any meeting. We just figured you needed a rest after you needed a break." So I sat down on
Yeah.
the couch. I sat down on the couch in there, just closed my eyes and rested for a few minutes. And then you and your team came in with a small cake and sang "Happy Birthday"
Birthday
to me.
cake. Yeah.
And I had completely forgotten that it was my birthday. It was it's a long travel from the United States. I just completely forgot what day it was, and it was such a nice gesture on your part. And anyway,
It
so
was.
so so, so Twitter has always been good to me. X, I now call it X. I'm not as active as I used to be. I mean, I am, you know, it's just different now for me. I'm closer to retirement than I used to be, so I'm fine with doing less things there, but I'm still active there. So.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kirk, for taking time out. And yeah,
Well,
please.
happy memories. So it's glad to glad to be with you again.
No, and then we loved, in fact, I still remember your energy and data hack summit was just outstanding. I mean, you did the long travel, you spent those days at the summit, and then you had to travel back, and it was
Well, you
just
didn't see me after I
fascinating.
got back to the hotel room. I literally just fell asleep, did nothing, just
Yeah.
shut down like nothing, like lights
No,
out, sound asleep as
so,
I got back to the hotel.
yeah. It is still very commendable. I mean, especially with US, your day and night flips, so jet lag in itself is difficult to
Well,
handle. But
well, the craziest one for
uh,
me was when I went to China because it was almost like 11 hours. It's what is it
that's
like?
like,
It's what is
yeah,
it? 9.5 hours? Is
yeah,
it 9.5 hours?
uh,
Nine, I don't know.
nine and a half. Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, the China thing was crazy because
it's a
the travel
complete
just had
flip.
all kinds of connections. When I finally got to the hotel where the conference was, I finally got into bed. And about an hour after I was in bed, hadn't been in bed for
Oh.
like 2 days. About an hour later, my host she calls me up and says, "Kirk, where are you? We're having our first meeting." I said, "What? I'm sleeping." She said, "Kirk, it's already 10 o'clock in the morning. You're an hour late." I said, "Oh, is that what time it is?" I had no idea what day it was, what time it was. So
Oh,
at least I had some when I came to Bangalore. I had some help there.
sure.
I had people who took me around and cared for
No,
me. So
it is.
that was a wonderful experience.
So thanks a lot, Dr. Kirk, once again for sharing those insights and your experience with the community. And I'm sure there is so much to learn, and you'll get a flurry of questions again from the community.
Uh,
you,
no
you could
problem.
answer from home.
Well, I think you know my style now. Ask me a short
Yeah,
question, you get a long answer.
sure.
I think we had enough experience of that for the last hour.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr.
You're very welcome. Glad to do it.